the Director of Threat Intelligence at Abnormal Security, where he leads a team responsible for researching enterprise-focused cyber threats, particularly business email compromise and credential phishing attacks. Prior to moving to the private sector in 2015, Crane served as an analyst at the FBI for more than 11 years, spending most of his career in the behavioral analysis units, providing support to intelligence community and law enforcement partners against national security adversaries and serial violent criminals. Ugh, had a busy job. In 2012, Crane helped create the FBI Cyber Behavioral Analysis Center, which combines the traditional behavioral concepts used for decades in the violent crime world with technical expertise to gain a holistic understanding of cyber adversary TTPs. So please welcome Crane Hasselt, who will be speaking on social engineering these social engineers, understanding phishing threats by engaging with actors. Take it away, Crane.
All right. First of all, I can't tell you how excited I am for this presentation. I've been wanting to give this presentation here for 3 years. I remember leaving Social Engineering Village in 2019 being like, I have a perfect idea. I'm going to submit this for 2020. And then, COVID happened. And so it wasn't until finally this year, everyone's back in person. I can see people. I can feed off of people. I'm so excited for this presentation. So what we're going to talk about today is, when we talk about phishing attacks, when we talk about cyber attacks, most people, there's a big perception out there that these are technical things, right? And I think that most people here know that for the most part, phishing threats are nothing more than exploiting human behavior. And when you look at some of the specific types of cyber threats that are out there today, there are some really interesting ways that we can collect intelligence and better understand these threats that are a little bit different than other types of attacks out there. So usually when I give this presentation, I give a little background about business email compromise, what it is, how big of a problem it is. I'm not going to go into that today. I'm sure most people here know about it. But BEC, it's a problem, causes billions of dollars of loss, easily the most financially impactful threat that's out there today. And so it's a problem, right? But what's unique about business email compromise is that in order for it to be successful, it requires an actual interaction and communication back and forth with a victim. Unlike things like credential phishing or malware attacks, where it's essentially they send out campaigns waiting for someone to click on a link or open a payload, it's very different with BEC. In order to get someone to wire money to a supposed vendor, there has to be a little back and forth communication there. And that's a point where we can actually interject into those conversations and start collecting some additional intelligence. This is something that we call active defense. And my definition for active defense is essentially interacting with an attack or an attacker for the purposes of collecting intelligence that helps us better understand that threat. And that could include things like engaging with BEC actors, seeding phishing sites, or embedding beacons in our communications. And so in practice, this is sort of how it goes in an active defense engagement. If a BEC actor says, "Can you send a new payment to a vendor?" our response to them is, "Sure." If they say, "Can you update my direct deposit information?" we say, "No problem." If they say, "Can you go out and buy $3,000 of Apple iTunes gift cards?" we say, "I'll run out in a few." And if they say something like, "Can you send me a copy of an aging report with all of our customers' contact information?" we'll say, "We'll get it to you by close of business," right? So essentially, we're just complying with whatever they're saying. That's essentially how a lot of these active defense engagements get kicked off. And then once they get kicked off, we sort of run them until really they're extinguished, until we sort of run them into the ground. Sometimes that takes 24 hours. Sometimes, as you'll see here in a little bit, that could take months. And so why do we do this? What's the reason that we run these active defense engagements? And one of the biggest reasons is it helps us understand the full BEC attack cycle. We're not just relying on that initial email to provide us information to understand the tactics and the techniques of the adversary. We're able to sort of see what happens after an attack is successful. We're essentially simulating a successful attack. We're able to see things like post-attack behavior, understanding how that interaction is going to go after someone responds to it. One of the other things that it's helpful for is identifying things like fraudulent mule accounts, where a lot of these actors want money to be sent, whether it's something like a payroll diversion attack or a payment fraud BEC attack. One of the great things about these engagements is we're able to understand what at the time of these engagements exactly that the actors think and believe that the accounts that they're providing to us are actually being able to be used in that instance for fraudulent purposes. And so one of the things that we do on my team is we actually work directly with financial institutions and major organizations like FSISAC to provide all of these mule accounts in real time to these organizations, hopefully to minimize the effective lifespan of these accounts. Because one of the things with BEC is because it's so big and there are so many actors out there that you can't possibly arrest your way out of this problem. And you have to think outside the box about how we can impact things like BEC, and the financial supply chain, I think, is really one of the ways that we can do that. So we're also able to supplement attacker attribution. So we embed beacons in each one of our communications that provides us some high-level attribution that usually about 20-25% of the time gives us a good non-proxy IP address that allows us to sort of understand where these actors are coming from. And then, as we'll see here a little bit later, one of the things that, from a pure behavioral perspective, that doing these engagements also at some point allows us to better understand the motivations behind these attacks, understand why these actors are doing what they're doing. And so at the end of the day, why does this work? Why does active defense work? Why do these engagements give us the information that we're looking for? From a success perspective, we get to have about a 60-65% success rate in our active defense engagements. And of the 30-35% that aren't successful, we know that most of the accounts are dead by the time we start them. And then we also know that there's a very small percentage of actors out there that are actually paying attention to who they're communicating with, right? So at any time in these campaigns, they're sending out dozens, if not hundreds of emails manually, and they're usually not paying attention to who actually responds back to them. So why does this work? So at its core, scammers are people too. They're human beings and they can be exploited just like their victims. And, this works because as long as human beings have been on this earth, as long as we've been communicating with each other, we've been social engineering each other. The only difference is now with cases like this, we're doing it through a computer, over the internet, through email, instead of doing it face to face or over the phone or through the mail or something like that. But the same concepts that have been used for literally thousands of years are the exact same reasons that things like this are successful. And so the same social engineering principles that they use to con their own victims are the exact same reasons that we're able to extract information from them. And one of the biggest reasons for this is because these attacks are highly financially motivated. And because they're highly financially motivated, as long as they have a slight belief that they're going to make some money out of this communication, they're going to keep going on with that line of questioning. And so what's really interesting is it also overrides a lot of the red flags that you would think would probably come up in some of these engagements. And this is sort of a great example of that. So this is an active defense engagement that I tweeted out a couple of years ago that lasted for 2 weeks. I was back and forth with this guy for 2 weeks and exchanged more than 100 emails with this scammer, collected 22 mule accounts, came up with a couple dozen different excuses about why a payment wouldn't work. And I'll tell you, that's actually one of the more challenging parts of doing this at scale, is coming up with excuses. At some point in this engagement, I started coming up with fake error codes and fake statute numbers, like a Title IV hold, which doesn't exist. But what's really interesting is when the scammer got back to me, he said, "Oh yeah, that's a tax. There's a tax issue there." So okay, thank you for telling me what my made up statute was all about. But at the end of the day, obviously, we didn't send any money to him, and he kept communicating with us for 2 weeks. He got no money out of this, but really, what that shows you is that he was willing to continue with this communication as long as he could have this sliver of hope that he was going to make something at the end of the day. That's just how significantly financially motivated a lot of these guys are. Now, doing that sort of manually is one thing, but one of the things that my team has done is we've actually scaled this entire process up that gives us a really good representative view of the entire BEC landscape. So we've built about 250 different personas that we use to engage with scammers. We run more than 25,000 active defense engagements since the beginning of this year. We've automated about 75% of the entire process. So as you look at more and more of these, you start seeing patterns of language and behavior from these guys, and we're able to sort of automate responses for a lot of these. Some engagements that we kick off today, we actually approve them, they get an initial response, and we never see them again because they go from beginning to end and it's a fully automated process. We've been able to collect more than 10,000 mule accounts that are used in BEC attacks, more than 600 attacker IP addresses. And then we've also been able to cluster about a third of all of our BEC engagements into about 50 different primary threat groups that are out there. And so once we do this at scale, once we blow it up, we're able to sort of better understand get a sort of a higher view of the BEC landscape. Now, the last thing I want to sort of talk about here is go over a case study to sort of run you guys through, what this kind of looks like. And what's really interesting about this case study is, while we've talked about business email compromise, BEC, what I'll run you through here is actually an engagement that I conducted with a social engineering ransomware actor. And so this was an attack that happened about a year ago. Actually, I think it's exactly a year ago. Oh, happy anniversary. So this attack came in, and it was interesting in the fact that instead of trying to deploy an actual payload or starting to get that initial network access that we see in most ransomware attacks, what we saw with this is that we had an actor that was trying to socially engineer employees to get them to deploy ransomware on their network. They said that, if you launch and deploy demonware ransomware on any main Windows server, I'll give you 40% of the cut, which is about $1 million, which if you do the math, that's about a $2.5 million ransom that he would have supposedly been asking for. And so what was interesting about this, because this is social engineering and because of the nature of this email, it would have required a response from an employee to actually take them up on their offer. So what did I do? I took him up on his offer. So the next day I created a Telegram persona and actually sent him a message with the Telegram account that he referenced in the initial email. And within 30 minutes, he got back to me with an initial response. And so you can see on the screen, the initial message was, saw your email. What could I do to help? And he said essentially the same thing that he had said in that initial email. And then starting to get into the details a little bit, started asking, yeah, sure, I can help you. What do I need? How do I install it? He starts talking about it's a software. If the server is Windows, I'll give you the software. So great. So this initial covert operation sort of lasted 5 days, but I want to show you a little bit of what the information we were able to obtain from this guy solely based on this initial engagement. Because again, this is why active defense is really helpful, because if it weren't for this, we would be totally relying on that initial email to essentially give us all the information we would have about this attack and the attacker. So the first thing that we were able to get is an actual sample of the ransomware that they wanted, that this guy wanted to use. So he sent it to me actually using 2 ways. This was actually through Mega, but he also tried to send it to me using WeTransfer as well. And it was through an executable file. We did an analysis of it, and lo and behold, it was in fact demonware ransomware. What was also really interesting, and I think if you talk to anyone who does ransomware negotiations, this is something that you'll actually see a lot of, is that there's a lot of flexibility into what they are willing to accept when it comes to ransomware payments. So as we said in the beginning, based on the inferences we could make from that initial email, the original ransom that he would have been asking for was about $2.5 million. At some point in our conversation, he started asking me about the company I supposedly worked for. I said it was like a medium-sized company, about $50 million of annual revenue. He said, well, maybe in that case, we can ask him for $250,000. I was like, whoa, hold on a second. You just said you were going to pay me, you were going to pay me $1 million to do this for you. What gives with that? And then he said, well, we can, if you want me to charge him $1 million, I'll charge him $1 million. But, we could also charge him $120,000. Like, okay. But what's really interesting about this is that because this is so financially motivated, regardless of whether it's $250,000, $2.5 million, $120,000, whatever amount that is life-changing for this guy, right? So that's all that really matters here. You know, this is why gift card BEC attacks are still a thing today, even though they're only making $1,000, $1,500 a pop. That's still a lot of money when you're making $500 a month, right? So it's also interesting, we have to identify, you know, where did this guy get their target's information? So, you know, not uncommon here. He said that he got, you know, all the information from LinkedIn. And what's really interesting is when we've done a lot of the research into BEC attackers, we're able to sort of understand where they get target information from. It's really interesting. It's the same tools, free, like actual legitimate commercial tools that sales and marketing teams use to identify sales prospects are the exact same tools that a lot of these guys are using to identify their targets. What's really, they'll sign up for a free trial. They'll sign up for an actual subscription using a compromised credit card, and they can put in a number of different parameters for who they actually want to target. And a lot of these services just pop out a very nice organized CSV file containing all of the initial lead contact information that they need to then carry on their attacks. Where did the code from? At some point I was like, you know, where did this come from? Out of curiosity, did you create the file or are you just using it? So he told me that he programmed the software using Python language. And I said, was it hard to create? He said, oh, yes, of course. Of course, it was very hard. But of course, if we did a little research into this Demonware ransomware actually is open source. It's available on GitHub. It's one of those, you know, security awareness ransomware strains that are out there that he essentially downloaded for free and was using it. And then the final thing before we get to the end of this is, you know, when it comes to attribution, sometimes you just need to ask, right? So at some point in this, I was like, you know, playing along with them, like, you know, how do I know you're not going to screw me? Because I'm a little concerned about this because, you know, this is something I'm a little scared about. And he was like, well, I'll give you some information. You know, I own this Nigerian social networking platform. Here's my LinkedIn profile, which actually was his LinkedIn profile. He said he was going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. And then, of course, I was like, so just to be clear, are you in Nigeria? And he was like, yeah, I'm in Nigeria. So that was pretty easy, right? And so with this, you know, this was the initial engagement, last about 5 days. I did what a good vendor does, and we wrote a blog post. And so we wrote a blog post about it, and then Krebs also picked up on it and wrote an article on his blog. And then a couple days later, I got a message on Telegram. And it was this guy, like, dude, I just read this. What is this all about? And I was like, oh, I didn't know that you read these things. So clearly they're paying attention to what's actually going on, but this gave us a really good opportunity to sort of pivot the conversation and engage this guy even further. And so that's what we did. So this engagement actually pivoted from a covert engagement to an overt engagement where he obviously knew who he was talking to at the time. And I got on a Skype call with this guy and started asking him a bunch of other questions. And one of the things that I found with BEC actors and a lot of scammers from Nigeria is they like to talk. I've done a couple dozen of these interviews with these actors in Nigeria, and they will relatively easily tell you a lot about why and how they do what they do. And so I want to go over a couple of the sort of clips from that interview to provide a little bit more context to help you understand, you know, a little bit more about the motivations of these actors. And so the first clip I want to show you is, you know, hits to the core of the motivation of why these actors do what they do. And essentially I asked him, you know, why do you do this? Like what drives you to run these types of scams? And so this is what he said.
I'm a normal guy in the streets of Africa, you know, trying to survive. You understand? Trying to survive. And it's not easy. You understand? It's not easy in the streets of Africa, in Nigeria. It's very, very hard. So let's just say, you know, there's a thing going on in Nigeria, most especially in all the young ones coming up. They all want to do fraud, you know? You understand? But in some people, the cases is to feed their family. You understand? Feed their family and provide risk and also try to just survive. That's just it. Trying to survive.
So this is something, so that the synopsis of this is that they're doing this as a job because they can't make money doing other things. This is a very common response. I've gotten to this question over and over and over again. And anyone who sort of has researched West African fraud and scamming, this is something that is not a surprise to anyone. From a criminal behavior perspective, this fits very nicely into understanding, what drives these guys. If you think about it, the average salary, if someone can get employed in Nigeria, is about $500 a month. But the unemployment rate for young men in Nigeria, regardless of their education, is huge, upwards of 50%. And so scamming and social engineering has been sort of ingrained in Nigerian culture specifically as a quasi-legitimate way to make money for literally 30 years at this point. And so this is not very uncommon. And so one of the other things I asked him was, I was curious about sort of understanding, what would sort of prevent these types of attacks? Like, if you were on the other side, what would have made it harder for you to accomplish your goals? For people,
What I know to be helpful to people is to invest in cybersecurity. You understand? If you watch movies like The Laundromat, you know about them? It's a movie. It was a company that was into money laundering and different dirty stuffs, stand. They laundered money for presidents and a lot of people. But at the end of the day, their secrets in the company was busted out due to weak cybersecurity. A lot of files of their money laundering activities were posted online, linking to presidents, prime ministers, and a lot of people. I think the story is online. Try to watch the movie, The Laundromat. So what I'm trying to bring out is that my advice to people is to invest in cybersecurity. And like I said, within the next 5 to 10 years, phishing will be a thing of the past.
So it's that simple. Just invest in cybersecurity, which I think is something that, my company says all the time, right? Invest in cybersecurity. Has anyone here seen The Laundromat? Yeah. So I actually have not gone and watched that movie yet, but I really need to. But it's a great recommendation, right? So he says there at the end, just in 5 to 10 years, phishing will be a thing of the past. And I asked him, I was like, if that does happen, let's say everyone invests in cybersecurity, what happens there? And he says, I don't know, maybe I'll just go into farming or something. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. So the last thing I'll show here is, as we were talking about people investing in cybersecurity, he mentioned something very strange, which he sort of brought up.
Yes, my advice, to people out there is to invest in cybersecurity. And people out there should invest in companies like Abnormal Security. Like I said, cybersecurity is the key.
Yeah, so I don't know if he was trying to get like a spokesman job or something like that. But he actually said, people should invest in abnormal security a couple times. Like, this is very strange. So anyway, I hope this gives you a general, understanding, a really quick understanding of how techniques like this can be used to better understand the threats that we're seeing that are getting worse every single year. Again, it's something that that's been really, it really gives you a lot of enjoyment to do things like this, because it helps you better understand the problems and the people behind these attacks. So with that, that's all I've got. I may have time for one question, but other than that, I hope everyone has a great rest of the conference.